Hello and welcome. My guest tonight is going to talk about a very, very personal part of her life and a very hard part. And she's sharing it because she wants to help other people deal with suicide, which is the topic. She wants to help people know that there is hope. One can get through the death of a loved one. And she has written some wonderful books about their family's experience, along with her 3 children. My guest is named Rebecca Anderson. She is here to talk about the books and her life. So welcome, Becky.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I want to start out with probably the hardest question, and that is, tell us a bit about your husband's death by suicide. Was it something you were afraid that might happen? Can you take us back? And it was 17 years ago, correct?
Yes. My husband died in October of 2002, and he was 52 years old at the time. He had struggled on and off with depressions, and in the last 3 or 4 years of his life, they became much more prolific and much longer lasting.
Mm-hmm.
And
so it was clinical depression,
yes.
Most likely.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Yes it was. Mm-hmm.
And I interrupted you, so did you want to say more about his struggle with depression? Did he seek treatment during this harder period?
He'd been in therapy with for years, for many, many, many years.
Okay.
And I've had the question asked, well, was he bipolar? And that seems to be kind of a common question, and he was not. He was clinically depressed. And as I said, the last several years of his life, he was really struggling. He was a very deeply gifted and very intelligent man. He was an engineer and an artist, a metallurgist by trade. And I say that because I believe that some of the conflict that he was experiencing came from struggling at that juncture in his life to redefine what he was doing and where he was going.
Kind of the midlife crisis.
I think so. I think that was part of it.
Mm-hmm. Was he a perfectionist? Was he someone who expected an awful lot from himself?
Yes, highly perfectionistic.
I'm guessing he might have been. You have 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. And as a parent and a grandmother now, I think maybe the hardest piece of all this would be, how do you tell the kids? You know, how do you broach the subject, and how did that go for you?
Well, now my children at that time, my daughter Patricia was 19 and had just started her freshman year in college. My son Aiden was 7 and had just started his year in 2nd grade. And then my youngest son, William, was 5, and he had just started kindergarten. And so after
all sort of vulnerable times in life, right?
Very much.
In a way, you know,
the oldest wanting independence and emancipation,
right?
And then the other 2, for obvious reasons, just learning the ropes of school and friendships and navigating all of that. So he, after we were notified and the police came to my home, I called my daughter. She was on campus at a local college. And I called her and asked her to come home. I had called her earlier and said that I was concerned, and I didn't want her to know because she was driving. And so I asked her to come home, and the boys were sleeping. And so when my daughter got home, she was told right away what had transpired.
Was she driving thinking that something awful must have happened?
I don't think
Did she ever
so.
share that with you?
I think there had been concerns just about some of his behavior prior to that, but I don't think it ever fully entered her mind until it happened that was a possibility.
And she had a lot of other things going on, as teenagers do. I mean, starting college and
yes, and was excited about college and her new life. And so I don't know what her thinking was as she drove home, but once she got home and was told, I let my boys sleep. And then the next morning, I was in touch. Fortunately, we were in therapy prior to my husband's death. And
You and your husband, or the
and
whole
all
family?
and the kids and the
Oh,
kids,
okay,
yeah.
the whole family.
And we were working with a particular kind of therapy with the kids called filial therapy, which is a play therapy. That with modest, very modest supervision, the kids lead because they can't really fully express and communicate in words what they're feeling. So I was in touch with the therapist immediately after I found out, and we walked through what I would say to the boys when they woke
I
up.
should mention to you, the viewers, that Rebecca is a social worker and a nurse. So you were a little ahead of some people perhaps in knowing how to lean on some resources right away.
We had always had, I'd always made sure that we had, whether it was mental health, quality mental health, or whatever it was, that we had some sort of a system in place. So I would say that that's partially the social work background, maybe
Sure.
to implement those services, and partially who I am. But when we told the boys, I was given a very simple suggestion, which was to tell them that my husband had died, which I did, and that to trust that they would ask me questions when they were ready as to what the specifics were, which turned out to be true. And so we had the opportunity in our situation to have that time in between. He was not home, and so when this happened, and so I made sure that the kids had some time to process it. So we left it at that, and that there had been an accident. And then they asked me within a day or so what kind of an accident it was, assuming it had been a car accident.
Sure.
And I told them that it had not, and a little time went by, and then they asked what had happened, and I told them at that time. And we were
Their
working.
reaction I am thinking of 5 and a 7-year-old, they can't grasp the enormity of it, could they?
No, and I think, no, they could not. I will say that, and knowing a 7-year-old's mind, you know that this was just the first response, but he looked at me and said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard."
Which is a pretty honest and right-on comment,
Right.
thinking of how anger is such a normal reaction.
Right, but he had no concept
Yeah, right, he wouldn't,
the
would he?
profound violence and enormity of the situation, and that set in later
And
with
I remember
PTSD.
You wrote too that one of the boys, I'm not sure if it was the 7 or 5-year-old, Aiden or Will, but said, "Are we going to get a new daddy?"
Oh yeah, yes, William asked that, and it's so innocent,
Sure.
so confused.
Typical of what you would expect, though, isn't it? Yeah. So you got through those horrible, numbing first weeks. You write in the books that the first year was hard, the second year was even harder, I believe. I think a lot of people who haven't gone through that kind of a thing perhaps think that after the first year it gets easier. Can you speak to that?
I think for me, and I've talked to other people who have had losses on a multitude of levels by different kinds of death or whatever, the first year you're in shock. You're going on automatic. You're making sure that the kids are taken care of, that you're setting some kind of a stability factor in there. You're gathering resources, you're regaining your equilibrium, you're walking through if there are any kind of legal processes.
Usually there's legal stuff to deal with.
And it's all consuming. And
Right.
you're sort of, you may not be fully in the same mind frame of shock that you were initially, but I still think there's a numbing
Yes.
that is going on. And for me, the second year, as I started to come out of it and more of the reality was hitting me of the scope of it and what that meant to our lives, that was extremely difficult.
The loss of the future that you envisioned is a huge thing, I'm sure. I was thinking as I was reading your books and getting to, ponder this big, hard topic, that there are some parallels just with any sudden major loss of a loved one, whether it would be a car accident or a heart attack. Some of the shock and the numbness and the need to, take care of oneself and one's family, but without the stigma and without the shame that a lot of families feel. So very different, but some parallels. And that's something I think your books could be helpful for anybody dealing with a sudden loss.
I would agree with that. When we did these, the subject matter has been suicide. But when we have presented, and also having had friends or, just in my work life or whatever, who've had an abrupt loss, there are certainly parallels there. The disorientation, the disbelief. A woman I was talking with, this was at a suicide event, had lost her brother recently to suicide. And I said, well, how are you doing? Which is, a standard question. And she said, well, there was life before and there's life after. And that's a very simple statement, but I think that that's the absolute truth.
Life before and life after. Another quote that I will ask you to share right now is the Buddhist quote that you used in multiple ways throughout this, but it's such a lovely quote or positive quote. Share that with the viewers, if you would.
Fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I found it in a card, and I put it on our mantle, and that was sort of our mantra for many, many years, because I believed that to be true. And we slipped and slid. None of this was easy, and I sometimes didn't know, exactly what to do. So I felt that card was very appropriate.
Fall down 7 times.
Get up 8.
Get up 8. Isn't that a smart comment? You and the kids all wrote a separate little book. And I thought that was an amazing kind of a challenge and a project. And the kids, you said, were very willing to put their thoughts down and share them with other people and be public about their grief. We were very involved in the arts all along, and our family was very interested in literature and so forth. So a lot of our friends were artists. And the woman who spearheaded the 4 books that profile the kids and me spearheaded the artistic process around it. So she would interview each of us, but the kids alone. So they were able to say she would ask questions, and they were able to answer in their own words, uncensored, and choose the art that they wanted to go along with their particular story. And I want to mention her name,
Laurie Phillips,
Phillips,
who is the artist in this project and my partner in this project and very, very dear friend. And I had done other projects with her prior to this. And she approached me to explore this venue for a fine arts master's that she was working on.
Oh, I wasn't clear on the evolution. I want to have our cameraman zoom in on each of the book covers because they're really lovely. So this is the first book, and let's shift here. The second one is called Parenting.
And that came later.
Oh, it did?
I wrote the memoir, yes.
Right.
It was suggested by people that I write a short memoir, so that's with the group, but a little separate.
Okay, can we zoom in on this one too? This is Patty's, and from the back of her head, I had to look at that a couple times.
Well, they're got her little kitty ears on. She's a vet tech. She's our animal
and
person.
Then Aiden's is right here. Now, Aiden is now an adult,
He's 24.
24, and Will then would be
He's 22.
22. And here's the youngest boy's book. I want to just also, while we're looking at the books, Rebecca, just show a little bit of the artwork, because the artist I read did the artwork with her non-dominant hand as a way to kind of express the rawness of the experience you were going through. And I just looking for the perfect picture, but let's just take a look at this one. The artwork is just very, very helpful in terms of telling the story. And it's lovely, really. I really, really liked it.
We wanted something simple and narrative, but also artistic. And I think we accomplished that part.
We've got 10 minutes left only. Can you tell us, when you think about coping and what got you through this horrendously challenging, hard thing, what were some of your kind of go-to, lean on coping tools, coping techniques, Rebecca, that helped you the most?
I think for me, having the support through the mental health arena, and I had excellent mental health, we developed a very strong support system within the schools immediately. My husband and I had been very involved, and they were magnificent. Nothing was perfect. The parents and the families really tried, because everyone was faced. My husband had been the Cub Scout leader, and so everyone was faced with this tragedy and their own little people to think about, what do I say? How do I deal with this? And so there was a community part to it that was very helpful. I also made sure that the boys got male mentors right away. And a man who had been a 9th grade biology teacher and had my daughter, had recently retired and had known my husband. And he stepped forward and remains his mentor.
Wow.
And my other son has a mentor from the time he was in about 2nd, 3rd grade, and he remains in his life. And my daughter, given her age and the age difference, it was different. She sought out some of her own interests. We remained very close, but that's a time in adolescence and trying to sort yourself out, and
you were wanting to be independent, and yet here she was pulled back into the family unit more than she wanted to be, probably.
And really struggling, but very close to her brothers. And so she found her way. She ended up going back to school. She left. She stayed for the rest of the year when my husband died, and ended up going back several years later to become a vet tech, because animals are her passion.
So all the kids, she and then the boys too, have all done well, haven't they?
I believe that
Getting
to be
through
true.
this thing that you wouldn't know for sure if they could come out on the other end, you know,
I believe
without
that to
a lot
be
of
true.
damage, so to speak.
That was my goal. I felt that they had every right and every possibility to live and thrive a very full life, knowing that it's permanent. But we also were very close to my husband's family during those very formative years, and spent a lot of time.
And that helped too, didn't it?
Humor helps, you know, the daily life helps, a lot of exploration. So I felt that we really gave it our all.
When you say humor helps, somewhere in one of the books, I think you use the word gallows humor, or, you know, really kind of raw humor. But that's an interesting realization that it can help, even in this kind of horribly sad and angry-producing situation.
And we all, I mean, nobody was laughing at first, I can certainly say that.
No.
But there were times, and I think what you're referencing is, we had a handyman who was a character, and he made a comment about suicide, and honestly, I had to laugh. And so, and the kids laughed because they liked him, and it was one of those things. But it's tricky, sometimes with that. But I have to say that humor has been a part.
Stigma. We're doing better as a society dealing with hard things. Did you experience any stigma that was hurtful, either you or the kids, do you think?
Yes, I have to say, and this isn't to whitewash or Pollyanna it at all, I have to say that overall, our experience was not one that I've heard from other people, which has been really heart-wrenching to hear. There are some friendships that did not continue. It was just too much, I think, for the other person.
Too much for them to absorb.
And as I mentioned before, I don't know if it's stigma or philosophy, but having these families having to be faced with a suicide and talking to their 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds because it was so community-oriented. I don't know if that's stigma as much as it's just sort of a reality slap that these things happen and how does one deal with them. But I asked the principal, who I was very close to because of the age difference with my kids, if there was ever an issue, and she said no one had ever complained about any of it. So, but I did have, my overriding experience was people cannot wrap their minds around why someone would do such a thing. And that's an unanswerable question.
That you couldn't give them
No.
much help on that, could you?
No, I've come to my own conclusions, but, or wanting one answer. Well, there isn't one answer.
Yeah, people do, I'm sure, want to be able to put it in some kind of a category and maybe hope that it would never happen to them by putting it in this category that wouldn't touch them.
I had actually had a few people say that to me, that will never happen. And there's not much of a response in that.
Yeah. In the workbook, and she's written, or she and Laurie have put together a wonderful workbook too called Healing After a Suicide Loss. There are all kinds of really helpful exercises that I thought, I would, look forward to doing that kind of a thing. But one of the exercises or sections was tips for friends on what to say and what to do. And could you just share a couple of the tips that you especially found important for your friendship world, for the relatives who maybe were outside the inner circle?
Tips to suggest to people?
Right.
Okay.
What they can do to be helpful,
I think,
as opposed to not being helpful.
I think one of the hard things, I think this is kind of standard with loss all the way around, is what can I do? Well,
right.
that's not a question that is going to be answered, I don't think, in those situations. So to bring a meal, or I read a really touching example of a woman who her husband died, and her neighbor said, every morning when I go to work, I drive by your garage door, and I'm going to put a Post-it note on the garage, either saying good morning or telling you I'm going to the grocery store, may I pick something up for you. I had friends offer to help with the kids, and I have one friend who's remained one of my closest friends. She just had a steadiness about her. She just had a steadiness. Her son is my son's best friend, and there was just a calm that she brought, and we had fun times together. It wasn't always about something heavy or intense.
That's important too,
and I
isn't
appreciated that.
Yes.
And the other thing I would say to people is, when they would say, what can I do? I would say, don't forget me in a year.
That's an honest comment. And just in terms of something not to say, is there any, we're talking doing, but what about saying? Is there something that you found particularly?
Why did he do it?
As you were saying.
That would be one, because again, there's no answer, or express anger. Although that's twofold, because I did have some people say, I'm mad at him. I was like, that was okay, because we all felt upset and jangled and kind of out of our orb. But I think that the judgment is very unhelpful.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. You didn't need that. Well, I want to give you some resource information. I'm sure as you're listening to Becky, you're wanting to probably know more, get a better look at the books. And so her website is www.suicidesurvivorsclub.org. We'll have that up on the screen. There's also a text line, TEXT, text line, and that is crisistextline.org. And as you said to me earlier, you type that in, a number comes up, you call the number, they call you right back.
You text the number in.
Yes.
So you go online to the crisistextline.org, and then it'll pop up on like a red screen or something, and it'll give some numbers, and you'll text that in, and someone will call you back right away.
And that's really important if someone's feeling extremely agitated. There's also a national foundation, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and that is afsp.org. And we should mention too the National Alliance for Mental Health.
Mental illness.
Or mental illness. National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. That is www.nami.org. So lots of great resources, and these are just some of them that you list in the books. Well, thank you so much for coming down. And
thank you so much, Mary. I really
sharing.
appreciate it.
Oh,
Thank you.
Very welcome. It's so helpful to know someone went through this and got through it and can help others.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week and check out her website. Bye-bye.